Welcome to Compassion Over Silence. I'm your host, Rashida Saunders. Today we're talking about softness. And before some of you tune out because that word feels uncomfortable, stay with me. Because if you've listened to this season, you already know I didn't arrive here naturally. We've spent this season talking about strength, survival, identity, leadership, love, grief, the things we carry. And after everything I've learned, I keep coming back to one unexpected truth. The goal was never to become stronger. The goal was to become whole. And for me, softness became part of that journey. Not because I stopped being strong, because I finally stopped believing strength was the only thing I was allowed to be. This is a space for honest conversations about leadership, healing, identity, service, and what happens when strength and humanity exist together, because carrying it all quietly comes at a cost. For most of my life, strength was my survival strategy. It wasn't a personality trait. It wasn't something I consciously chose. It was a necessity. When you grow up learning to manage disappointment quietly, you become strong. When you learn not to depend on people, you become strong. When you learn to keep moving regardless of what you're carrying, you become strong. When you're a Black woman navigating spaces that constantly demand more from you, you become strong. When you spend years in law enforcement responding to crisis after crisis, you become strong. Strength was rewarded, strength was expected, strength became familiar. And because it was familiar, I rarely questioned it. What I questioned was softness. Softness felt dangerous. Softness felt exposed. Softness felt vulnerable. Softness felt like something other people could afford, not me. Not someone responsible for so much. Not someone carrying so much. At least that's what I believed. The problem was that my version of strength often came with isolation. I could handle almost anything, but I struggled to receive help. I struggled to trust. I struggled to rest. I struggled to let people see me when I wasn't okay. And eventually I realized something important. Being capable and being connected are not the same thing. You can be incredibly strong and still be incredibly lonely. You can be incredibly accomplished and still feel exhausted. You can be incredibly dependable and still be deeply disconnected from yourself. I know because I've lived it. Because once people see you as the strong one, they often stop asking questions. I remember a season of my life when almost everyone around me described me the same way: strong, resilient, dependable, the person who always figured things out, the person who could handle difficult situations, the person who showed up. And while those descriptions weren't wrong, they were incomplete. Because what people didn't always see was how tired I was, how much I was carrying, how often I convinced myself that asking for help would burden someone else. I had become so accustomed to being the strong one that I stopped allowing myself to be anything else. I stopped allowing myself to be overwhelmed. I stopped allowing myself to need support. I stopped allowing myself to be human. Looking back, I realized that strength can become a prison when it becomes your only identity. Not because strength is bad, because no one was meant to carry everything alone. They stop checking in, they assume you're fine, and eventually you start assuming it too. Strength became my identity, and identities are difficult to challenge, especially when they've helped you survive. Then therapy entered my life, and therapy has a way of asking questions you've spent years avoiding. One of those questions was simple: what would happen if you stopped fighting everything? I remember sitting in my therapist's office one afternoon feeling frustrated. On paper, everything looked fine. I had a career, I was raising my daughter, I was leading, I was showing up. I was doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do, and yet I was exhausted. At one point, my therapist asked me a simple question: when do you rest? I remember laughing, not because it was funny, because I genuinely didn't know how to answer. Rest wasn't something I practiced. Rest was something I earned, or at least that's what I believed. And sitting there, I realized how much of my life had been built around proving my worth, not receiving it, not enjoying it, proving it. That conversation stayed with me. At first, I didn't know how to answer because fighting was familiar, pushing through was familiar, enduring was familiar. Softness wasn't, rest wasn't, receiving wasn't, trust wasn't. But healing has a way of introducing you to unfamiliar things. Slowly, I began experimenting with a different way of living. The first time I chose softness wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen during a breakthrough. It didn't happen during a life changing moment. It happened in a small decision. I was tired. Emotionally tired, physically tired, spiritually tired. And for once, instead of pushing through, I stopped. I rested. I let something wait until tomorrow. I let myself be unfinished. That may not sound significant, but for someone whose identity had been built around productivity and responsibility, it felt revolutionary. Because I wasn't proving anything, I wasn't earning anything. I was simply acknowledging that I had limits. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. That moment taught me something important. Softness isn't always found in big decisions. Sometimes it's found in the small moments when we stop demanding so much from ourselves, not abandoning strength, expanding it, allowing room for things that hadn't existed before. Honesty, vulnerability, rest, compassion, grace. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like learning a language I should have known but didn't. I remember moments when people offered support, and I immediately wanted to decline. Moments when people expressed care, and I wanted to minimize my needs. Moments when I felt emotional and immediately tried to regain control. Old habits, old armor, old survival strategies. The thing about survival strategies is that they don't disappear just because we recognize them. They continue showing up. The difference is that now I could see them. And because I could see them, I had choices. One of the greatest teachers in my life has been motherhood. My daughter has taught me things therapy couldn't. She has shown me what love looks like when it isn't earned, what presence looks like, what affection looks like, what emotional honesty looks like. I wanted her to know she was safe. I wanted her to know she was loved. I wanted her to know she didn't have to perform for my affection. Then one day I realized something. I was giving her things I had never fully learned to give myself: patience, compassion, permission, grace. I remember watching Kenzie after a difficult day. She was disappointed about something that felt huge to her, the kind of disappointment that only a teenager can feel. And as we talked, I found myself reassuring her, telling her she didn't have to be perfect, telling her one difficult moment didn't define her, telling her she was worthy regardless of how she performed. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized I believed those things for her more easily than I believed them for myself. I had spent years offering compassion to everyone around me: my daughter, friends, coworkers, people I served, but I rarely extended that same compassion inward. That realization was both painful and freeing because it showed me exactly where the work still needed to happen. Recently, I noticed something that would have been unusual for me a few years ago. Someone offered to help. Nothing major, just help. And my first instinct was the same one I've carried most of my life. No, I've got it. But this time I caught myself. I paused, and instead of automatically declining, I said thank you. It sounds small, but for someone who spent years believing strength meant handling everything alone, it felt significant. Because softness isn't always a breakthrough. Sometimes it's allowing people to care about you. Sometimes it's believing you don't have to earn support. Sometimes it's trusting that receiving isn't the same thing as depending. It's simply being human. That realization changed me because healing isn't only about understanding your past, it's about changing your relationship with yourself. And for me, softness started there. Not with other people, with me. Learning how to speak to myself differently, learning how to stop measuring my value through productivity, learning how to stop treating rest like something that had to be earned. Learning how to stop believing that exhaustion was proof of commitment. That's a lesson many of us need, especially those of us who have spent our lives achieving, serving, leading, providing. Somewhere along the way, we begin believing that our worth is connected to our output, that if we're not producing, we're failing, that if we're resting, we're falling behind, that if we're struggling, we're weak. But healing taught me something different. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is cry. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're overwhelmed. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is allow yourself to be cared for. That last one was especially difficult for me because receiving care requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires surrendering the illusion of control. I didn't realize how much energy I was spending trying to stay protected until I started putting the armor down. That's what softness revealed. It revealed how tired I was, how much grief I was carrying, how much fear was hidden beneath my self sufficiency, how much energy it took to constantly hold everything together. But softness revealed something else too: peace, connection, joy. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when you allow yourself to be human. These days, softness looks less like a feeling and more like a practice. It looks like asking for help, resting without guilt, letting people show up for me, and trusting that my worth exists even when I'm not accomplishing something. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when you're no longer fighting yourself, the kind that shows up when you stop believing you have to earn your worth, the kind that shows up when you allow yourself to be human. One of the greatest misconceptions about healing is that it transforms you into someone completely different. I don't think that's true. I think healing helps you return to yourself, to the parts of you that survival buried, the parts of you that existed before the armor, the parts of you that knew how to rest, how to trust, how to feel, how to hope. There was a time when I thought healing would feel dramatic. I thought there would be a moment when everything suddenly made sense, a moment when all the grief, the therapy, the reflection, and the work would finally come together. But that's not how it happened. Most of the changes in my life have been quiet, a different response, a healthier boundary, a little more rest, a little less self judgment, a willingness to ask for help, a willingness to receive it, a willingness to believe that my value exists even when I'm not proving anything. Looking back, I realized softness didn't arrive all at once. It arrived one small decision at a time. As I prepared for this conversation, I found myself thinking about everything we've talked about this season: the silence, the strength, the uniform, the leaders we remember, identity, love, grief. And what I realized is that every one of those conversations was really asking the same question: what happens when we stop performing and start telling the truth? For me, softness became part of that answer. Not because life became easier, not because I stopped carrying difficult things, but because I stopped carrying them alone. I stopped measuring my worth through exhaustion. I stopped treating vulnerability like a threat. I stopped believing that being human was something I needed to overcome. And that changed everything. As we close out the first season of Compassion Over Silence, I want to thank you for being part of these conversations. My hope was never to have all the answers. My hope was simply to tell the truth about strength, the truth about grief, the truth about leadership, the truth about healing, and maybe most importantly, the truth about being human. If this season taught me anything, it's that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to yourself, returning to the parts of yourself that survival buried, returning to the parts that still know how to trust, how to hope, how to rest, how to love, and how to soften. When this season began, we talked about what happens when strength becomes survival. As we close this season, I think the deeper question is: what happens when survival is no longer the goal? What becomes possible when you're finally free to live? This season has been about what we carry: the stories, the silence, the expectations, the grief, the strength, the identities we build, and the armor we wear. Next season, I want to explore what happens when we lead from a different place. Not leadership as position, not leadership as authority, leadership as humanity, leadership as trust, leadership without armor. And I can't wait to have those conversations with you. This week, I want you to reflect on this question: what would change if you stopped treating softness as weakness and started seeing it as trust? Thank you for joining me for season one. If this conversation resonated with you, follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone who may need it. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. And remember, strength got you here, but softness may be what allows you to stay. I'll see you in season two.